This episode is with special guests Emily Blefeld and Dan Cohen. We explore how the heart can perceive, see, and communicate silently, the powerful inner work that can develop consciousness, bringing compassion and understanding to a larger tapestry of your life, and shifting the binds that limit our hearts. Dan, Emily, and I have wonderful conversations about our ancestries and how that shapes who we are. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Embody podcast, a show about remembering and embodying your true nature, inner wisdom, embodied healing, and self-love. My name is Candice Wu, and I'm a holistic healing facilitator, intuitive coach, and artist sharing my personal journey of vulnerability, offering meditations and guided healing support, and having co-creative conversations with healers and wellness practitioners from all over the world. This episode is made possible by the monthly Embodied group call. There are 2 calls beginning November 2018 that will be offered where you can receive transformative support for the soul and the body for whatever comes up in each month or for strengthening your energy and intentions on your journey. So this is for you if you'd like some of that soul and body healing, support moving through your emotions, tuning into your intuition and getting very clear with yourself, and aligning with your purpose, your wisdom, and beliefs that give you empowerment. It's a lovely way to both receive healing support at a lower cost than individual sessions and to support the podcast. If the podcast has inspired you or touched you at all, this is a way to contribute back. And all of the proceeds go towards podcast production and to nourish each episode. You can sign up at candicewu.com/Patreon or take a look at the other offers that are on Patreon that you can contribute to the podcast. Thanks so much for considering. I am just honored to have Dan and Emily on the show today. I appreciate the profound and very clear ways that they reveal the inner dynamics that connect up with our souls and our collective dynamic. I've experienced this personally with their work where I've found an unbinding and untangling with the dynamics that are in my history, the dynamics and stories that needed acknowledgement so that I could move forward in my life. And I found that they hold space for so many layers of consciousness, including the collective energies, personal histories, ancestral, cultural, historical, and other worlds and dimensions that influence who we are today, that influence our feelings inside and how we see ourselves in the world. I specifically experienced this with myself in a family constellation with Dan and Emily together, where what came up was I wanted to feel a stronger sense of myself. And in the constellation, a person was representing my grandmother, and this person kept saying something about losing her footing. And what revealed itself through that was the cultural history in Chinese culture of foot binding. And I was somewhat aware of that, but through that connection, it led me to doing a little more research about Chinese foot binding and why and how women were binding their feet and the relationship with men and women in that dynamic and how it related to me. And I could even remember at that time feeling like my feet felt so weak. They felt like I couldn't really stand on solid ground. So losing my footing, that quote from my grandmother, seemed to really make sense in the greater context of what was way before all of us with foot binding. So I just wanted to share that bit of a story of my personal experience with Dan and Emily, and can't wait for you to get a taste of their work here today on the show. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Well, today I'm really delighted to have both Dan and Emily here today. I would love for you to share a little bit about yourselves. Hello, Dan and Emily.
Hi, Candice.
Hi, Candice.
How are you doing?
We're doing very well. Really excited to be speaking with you and have this three-way conversation for your listeners.
We're really appreciating the invitation to be a part of the call with you, this podcast with you, and just have a great appreciation for you and what you're offering the world.
Thank you. The appreciation goes the other way too. I'm so grateful for what you're sharing in the world. And every time I've experienced your work together, it's just really mind and spirit blowing. It's even just being in your presence and as well as doing Constellations work. It's like the cosmos open up when we do work together or just be together. And I'm just delighted to have the two of you. And this is the first time I've had two guests on a show. And it's also the first time I experienced working with two facilitators. And I would love for you to share with the audience today how you do that and what your work is and who you are.
Well, that's a great place to start. So I'm Dan Cohen, and I work and live with Emily, and we work with people, individuals and groups locally here in Providence, Rhode Island, and all around the United States and internationally as well. And we're working at making the resources of consciousness beyond the ordinary available to people in the ordinary day and day.
I'm Emily Blefeld, and Dan and I co-founded Seeing with Your Heart. We met Candice at the North American Systemic Constellations Intensive, and it's a real privilege to be a part of this call and to share space with you, Candice. Your work with dreams and your work in the field of consciousness surrounding kind of coming home to yourself and coming home to your being is just really utterly inspiring. I'm just grateful to be your colleague.
Thank you.
In terms of our work, we work with people on accessing consciousness beyond the ordinary and exploring all the vibrations of their being, the way they feel in the world, the expressions of their truth, and how they're actually multidimensional aspects of life, that we are humans and we are also vibrating with the consciousness of those that came before us. And so we support people in stepping into their power, their purpose, their clarity, their truth, and really their own inner mystic to be able to kind of access their magical and mystical sides and bring it forward into their life.
I feel what you're doing in the world is so beautiful. And you have the Seeing with Your Heart program, which even just feeling into those words, seeing with your heart, it brings to me the feeling of that magic and connection with what's unseen and beyond. How did you get into this work? Or how did you find yourself here?
Well, we've been on, separate paths most of our lives. And then we met 6 years ago and went through a really slow period of getting to know each other and interacting. And then we started working together professionally. We started co-facilitating together. And then we started doing groups together. And then our personal relationship grew. We are in a heart space all the time. And even though we're an unlikely couple, just the way that we were traveling these pathways of consciousness so much and being open-hearted and seeing with your heart brought us into a love relationship as well. And so we are connected in those ways. For me, the origins are as a peacemaker, someone interested in conflict resolution and violent prevention. And having done that work for many, many years, for decades, I realized that there was a piece missing. There was a tool that was not in the toolbox. It wasn't even being spoken about. I didn't know what it was, and it didn't seem like very many people knew what it was. It wasn't in the literature, and I went looking for it. And I spent about a year looking for it, and I came across Family Constellations work coming out of Germany and recognized that it was the tool that I was looking for. That was almost 20 years ago. And since then, I've been working with it, very extensively, full time for over 10 years. And each time we open up the field of consciousness and dive down into these layers of consciousness that are within us and around us, we learn something new about the mystery of our existence.
For me, I identify as a wisdom-preneur. I've just been an entrepreneur who's always seeking wisdom of how to be human, how to be the greatest form of myself and the fullest expression of my love. and my gifts and talents in the world. And so I was a psychotherapist in private practice and came across this work when I was supporting entrepreneurs and visionaries with overcoming kind of the avalanche of modern living, how to be balanced and centered in life, and also live your love, live your purpose. And I came across this work when I was looking for a tool that could support people when they feel like they've met their purpose, they're kind of doing it, they're productive, they're effective, they're living their life, they're in relationship, and yet something still feels like it's missing. There was kind of this inner emptiness that was alive in my own life at the time and also in clients' lives. And I went looking for the tool that creates a sense of wholeness, not only in the person, but the wholeness in family and relationships and in communities at large. I find so many people that are most successful, that are their greatest visionaries or activists in the world, that actually on an extroverted level appear full and complete. Inside, there's kind of this insatiable desire for something more. And I was curious on what fills that desire, what quenches thirst. And I came across Constellations when I was attending a program called Women Leading Change Against Gender-Based Violence. And this work, in 30 minutes, I found my entire family was set up. I saw my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother kind of in representation form. And there was this emergence of tears and grief. And, the people that participated in the constellation knew nothing about my family and just fully represented all of the entanglements that were there. And it was kind of mind-blowing. The actual experience was mind-blowing, but I didn't really think too much of it, think I'd start facilitating it. But in the weeks to come after that experience, everything in my life changed, and things in my sister's life, my mother's life changed. And I realized that this work not only affects the person that's sitting in your office with you, but it affects, every family member that is in relationship with the person you work with. I needed to learn more, and that was kind of the beginning of the journey.
Wow. I can really relate to that sense of what's, being really successful, being in this more outwardly life that looks amazing, and then feeling that emptiness inside, or that something's just not really fulfilled or right. I think it's so powerful what you both are doing in terms of working with those subtleties of what that sense of unease or unrest that can lead to just so much depth and knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big shift in the paradigm of consciousness. I was raised in a very secular environment in Manhattan, where the only things that were real were kind of physical objects and the energy that moves the universe. It's a very kind of scientific worldview, and I was brought up in that, and I think that's part of what I felt was missing. I was aware for myself, kind of gathering into large groups around spiritual traditions felt like a bit of a trap for me, as I was more mystical in my orientation, that if there is consciousness beyond that physical, that each individual has equal access to it, that it's not only spirit mediums that can talk to the dead, it's not only psychics that can be telepathic, it's not only priests or priestesses that have access to angels and the divine, that every individual has that capacity. And I was very interested in what human life looked like if we stepped out of the constraints of a materialist worldview and stepped into more of a magical worldview, that we recognize that we actually are open and in communication with past, present, and future all at once, and consciousness beyond us, beyond our own individual brains.
I found for me, it was as a psychotherapist in private practice, working with people who are always kind of trying to find the answers, pathways to their own healing and wellness. I found many times I was being asked to kind of explain away the mystery, explain where the anxiety is coming from, or support somebody in overcoming their grief or their pain, their suffering, the traumas of their lifetime, and to understand them. And despite how often we explored what we knew and maybe what we knew we didn't know, we rarely tapped into those places of what you don't know that you don't know. And I was seeking to find the answers to what can't be explained. Who is present in someone's anxiety, or who is present in somebody's grief and sadness, or the traumas that they're experiencing. What is it that is creating these fractals in human consciousness and creating this challenge, or these intentions, or these wanderings? It just felt like there was so much more happening in our space than what met the eye or what met the story. And in the work that we've done, it really opens to create space for the mystery, and for diving into who else, what ancestor, what spirit guide, what presence is with us in these questions and in these challenges, and how to heal and access a much higher level of magic in everyday life. It kind of blew the top off psychotherapy for me, and it kind of revolutionized my practice, and it opens me to continued questions.
Yeah. It's very similar to the experience I had. Like, it just blew the top off of anything else I knew. And I remember going to my first constellation and just being floored. Like, I had no idea there was something so unexplained and magical, and yet synced right up with every part of my being, every fiber of myself that I could feel. And I love the way you explain it. And I'm curious about how it feels to work together, the two of you, and how you tune in together. I've witnessed moments where the two of you are facilitating and you'll say, let's just tune in together. And then you'll just agree on something unconsciously, or I don't know if that's the right word to say, but you'll agree on something silently between the two of you. And it just starts to magically unfold, or you'll make decisions in the space of not talking out loud. And so I've just loved witnessing that happen, the magic of that, which is, I think, in some ways not so quote unquote magical, but maybe methodical as well, or maybe just sensing. So I wonder how you speak to that, and what's happening for you, how you experience it.
Sure. It's been a real journey to collaborate, and then come together. Both of our origins, we both had thriving practices individually. And when we started to collaborate with some of our shared clients and each of our clients individually, we found that there was something so much greater that came present into our work when we worked together versus when we worked individually. I find Dan brings this profound sense of history, and he actually holds his memory outside of his brain. So we'll be working in the field, and it almost like an iPhone app. When you press an app on a phone and you can just bring up like all this information, he can kind of access a field of memory beyond what he's stored in his brain. That's like an app. It's like he turned on the app and he just draws something in. So we may be working with somebody's depression, and we end up with the famine of generations past in some third world country where Dan knows nothing about the history, and yet he's able to access the information in that person's field of consciousness. So that's something that I have very strong kind of sight perception and capacity to see and hear and feel and know the exact ancestors in the room. But the context that they lived in is something that Dan can paint a picture of that's beyond belief. And when I experienced that the first time in working with him, I quickly felt, well, that's more relevant. That's better. That's a better aspect. It's we put ourselves down and put somebody else above us. In the beginning of working together, I had to work pretty solidly on myself, my own inner critic, on exploring, who is that voice that comes up inside of me that says, just seeing an ancestor or sensing an ancestor or being able to tune in with like that level of precision isn't as great as being able to understand the full collective macro trauma of society or culture. So I guess an answer to that was kind of the beginning. And one of the things that I always say in any collaboration that anybody does with anybody is to really look at what you bring as your own gift, and then work with the part of you that discredits your gift as not being enough or polished enough or strong enough or in relation to others, can't really take its place. It's our work as facilitators and leaders to really do our work on our own inner critics so that we can show up in our fullness and trust our movement and trust, what we provide. And then secondly, I guess the place it's led to in doing my own work on my own wholeness and my own confidence and leadership, and being able to honor Dan's gifts and Dan's strength and leadership, we find that it's quite seamless. We can read each other's minds and tune in. And so when we co-facilitate, we're sort of communicating in silence between our hearts. And actually, most of the people that do our programs will access that capacity to communicate with their heart and communicate with another with their heart. So I find it's something that all humans have the capacity to do, but Dan and I are practicing every day and, using that organ of perception like a muscle that you just build. And so there's less need for words and more need for the heart and kind of trusting and working together.
Beautiful.
For me, I come at it from my own background. And I think Emily and I are able to do is we're modeling how the masculine and feminine energies interact and move within individuals and within partners or larger groups of people. As Emily's describing her, that inner critic that comes in, so she may see an ancestor in the room or get some wonderful, incredible insight about what is happening in the system. And then there's an inner critic that comes in that starts to kind of put it down, a kind of internalized oppressor, internal patriarch or matriarch who comes in and starts undercutting it.
Let me just add something. And that happens for most mystics. Particularly women that are stepping into a field with a man present, that internalized oppression, that part that kind of challenges, what are you doing in this field of consciousness? It's taking a stand or speaking your truth. It's almost every mystic I know or every empath I know that stands in the space with a man, that it's our work to find out who is that in our lineage and how to include it and work with it so it doesn't sabotage our movement forward and our kind of rising in our own leadership. Go ahead, Dan.
For me as a Jewish baby boomer from New York City, born in the 1950s, so I came into the world 10 years after the end of the Holocaust when, half of the Jewish community had been murdered. And so the babies that were born in the United States, Jewish children came after the war, had such a great pressure put on them or expectation to restock the pond. In a sense. So there was this tremendous amount of expectation that there was something that needed to be replenished that myself and the others of my generation were going to take care of. And that continued through my childhood, even though I was, a great disappointment to my parents in many ways because I didn't really, pick up the violin or a pencil very well. But that expectation was there. And corollary to what Emily's describing is, as a baby boomer white male, I have a kind of arrogance that I'm so sure of myself. I'm so positive that what I think is happening is right and the direction that I want to go is the right way to go. And I know how to help the people. And there are times where I need to find how to step back from my own sense of importance, of entitlement, a privilege, of the wisdom of my own ideas. And I think in the interaction between the two of us, as Emily's inner critic is being kind of worked within her, my kind of inner asshole is getting worked within me. Mm-hmm. And so in our partnership, we're working with these masculine and feminine energies, both with ourselves and with our partnership. And I think what we're able to, create with that is something beautiful. And I think that people, don't see it modeled very often. I think that's one of the things that people find in our partnership that's very appealing, to actually see masculine and feminine, not, beyond a man and a woman, but how each of us contains masculine and feminine energies, and we hold those in balance individually, but also together in the way that we're working.
And how we work with the shadow of it, that it's really easy when you're in a place of leadership to embody the polarity of what you're seeking to set forth. So if I'm wanting to support people in stepping into their mysticism or their breath of life, and it requires space and time and kind of more yin energy, I can find myself meet the polarity to that intention. So inside, I can feel like I want to clarify. I want to make it really easy. I want to move it right along. I want people to understand what I'm doing. There's kind of an anxiety about being with that yin. And, for Dan, he at times can step back and be more feminine in fear potentially of that his masculine may be too strong or may not be received, and that he needs to kind of hold space. And in essence, his voice gets lost. So there's also a dance in being able to claim who he is as a man in this world, a man of privilege, and use that privilege to create spaces for healing and to empower the disempowered and to empower his voice. So there's a real dance in working with the polarities as they arise. We find any intention that you set, you oftentimes meet its polarity in the first few moments of trying to step into it.
That makes complete sense. It's also very relevant to me right now, this dance of the polarities. And sounds like what you're saying, Dan and Emily, what you're saying about what you witnessed with Dan is that ability to use the tools of masculine and feminine in you and draw upon them at different times, but then also not, just experiencing going a little too far maybe, or losing yourself in some way, and where is something a reaction to that initial experience, and where is it balance? Where does it feel like you, or feel like you're claiming your full resonance and power? It's complex.
Absolutely.
Right. And it works right into the core of constellation work, which is looking at the balance of polarities. We work often with the way that people are their own victims and carry kind of a victimization consciousness within them and keep acting out, playing out in different parts of their lives, the way that they get victimized. We certainly see it in relationships, that people have a series of relationships and they're victimized in each relationship, or they might see it in their employment where they're the hardest working person, but every time they're kind of getting taken advantage of. And then also within families with siblings and parents and children, how someone can be playing the victim role, or the opposite of that someone could be in relationships where they find themselves over controlling, or they lose their temper or become, very angered and controlling, and they're kind of taking on more kind of perpetrator energy. And so that's in the core design of Constellations, is to bring all that to light and to find, where the threads are, to trace the root back to, where did this pattern of victimization begin? And sometimes we can see it in the family with mothers and grandmothers, but often we're tracing it back through history. So if we're working with a person of European descent, we might find it's related to the wars in Europe, or Irish certainly to the oppression of Ireland under British rule, and wherever it is in the world. We're always tracing back both through the family and through the history, and then bringing forth and allowing people to be in relationship with the perpetrator within them and the victim within them, their inner victim, and maybe what's compassionate in them, what takes care of people who are in need or have or disadvantaged in some way. And that perpetrator is the person who knows how to get things done, who can step into a situation that might be very chaotic and bring some order, have a vision and see it fulfilled. And so there actually is a value in, rather than just repeating these memes of past generations, to be able to gather those threads of consciousness and use them to be able to move life forward in a good way for ourselves and for others.
For me, I found my default is at times to kind of sit on the fence, as Bert Hellinger, the founder of Constellation Work, would describe. I might not want to stand up for what I feel, or ruffle anyone's feathers, start a conflict, or kind of step away. I just sort of am a bystander. I can stay there kind of quiet on the sidelines of my life and notice that I'm doing things that I don't really want to do, or I'm agreeing to things I might not want to agree to, or I'm not really addressing the conflict in my life. I'm just kind of sitting back, hoping that it'll pass. And I find, that particularly many women in the world will do that and are trained to do that, to not really stand up for their truth or step into their power or create conflicts and not clean them up. They might people please or do what others want, not need or receive anything from anybody. And that it creates a level of flatness and kind of depression, a baseline in life that is like they're not really in the game of life. And it's oftentimes a protection of being innocent. Dan's kind of talking about perpetrators and victims. The one who doesn't dirty their hands or doesn't get over involved or kind of stays back and avoids the conflict, maybe doesn't take risks because doesn't want to lose, or doesn't step away from something out of fear that it'll be the wrong choice, that we're oftentimes not really fully living our life and will feel a level of flatness, emptiness, to put kind of a light dysthymia or depression. And it can be really collapsing, and yet it preserves our innocence and our sense of belonging to our families or our relationships or our way of life that no longer serves us. So a lot of the work we do is around supporting people in getting off the fence, stepping into their life, and really feeling what are the consequences that come up, what energies are moving through them, what are they resisting, what are they accepting, what's their truth in that movement.
Yeah, you described my default perfectly. And the words like protection of being innocent, that really can highlight the true heart of it, like the desire that comes out of doing that, to stay innocent, to be loved, to be seen in a loving light. Thank you for that. And I think it's really powerful what you're doing with that language, as well as you're using beautiful language, but I know that the work that you're doing is incredibly tuned into the body and sensing and moving, and how you weave this together is beautiful. What challenges do you find in working together or working in this area of energy and consciousness and in the ancestry of everything?
For me, one of the challenges is I'm a true empath. And so I find the importance for kind of spiritual and psychic hygiene is really high. That after each session, I kind of clear my body and clear the space that I work within. And sometimes days before a session, I can start to feel the symptoms of what I'm going to be working with. And it's really easy to make it mine. Oh, I'm feeling some challenge. And you might feel a sense of apathy or a sense of anxiety or a sense of rage and it's kind of arising in your life. And then 2 days later, you meet with your client, and the client describes the exact feelings you've been feeling for 2 to 3 days. And so in the beginning of my practice, that was a great challenge of mine, was that I was thinking that I was just emotionally labile and there's all these things that were moving through me, when actually it was oftentimes something what we call as pre-field, where the consciousness is arriving to be worked with a bit earlier than the human, and human's appointment is actually scheduled. And so I've had to learn all types of practices, kind of setting barriers to the space I work in, almost like consciousness waiting rooms, where the ancestors and the guides that are showing up earlier can hang out in the waiting room before the session starts. And it's been a huge shift and change for my life to have these certain types of practices that really help empaths to do the work they're meant to do. Because I find many times it's that energy that can stop us from fully wanting to do this full time. And I oftentimes envy Dan, because he's like Teflon. It's like none of this energy really permeates his system in the same way that I feel it in. And I think it's just based on everybody's different way of being. So he's been able to honor the practices I need to set up to be able to facilitate in a healthy way. But I would say that's probably the number one challenge that I've had in doing this work is, where do I start and another human being begins?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think my biggest challenge is some kind of over-eagerness that sometimes can border on just being a little bit intrusive when I'm in the more public conversation around mental health and activism, about people wanting to start businesses and grow their practices. There is the dominant paradigm is either a kind of very flat and kind of ordinary reality based, or it can be very disconnected from that reality and kind of up into the clouds, into the ethers, and without a real strong flow and connection between the two worlds. I feel like the work that we're doing is being able to really integrate ordinary day-to-day consciousness, the consciousness of ancestors that's with us all the time, that's always communicating and interacting with us in all kinds of ways, and then the consciousness of beyond human scale, the consciousness of spirit, and that there's a way that if we can pull in all of these threads and use them as a resource to be able to clear these ancient wounds, and then to be able to access the ethers and spirit consciousness, be able to access it through our biological lineage, we can really become, really very empowered and capable people who can manifest and create what we want in the world. And when I see it, how much it's not happening, and how so many people are just stuck with repetitive emotional patterns and relationship patterns and work patterns, and not able to really express themselves fully in the world. It's like frustrating for me, and I almost want to kind of grab people by the shirt and tell them, hey, this can, you don't have to live this way. You can actually release. You don't have to carry a bad mood for 10 years. It can be cleared, but you can't do it with the tools that you're using. And it can be a little overbearing. So I've had to learn how to modify that, kind of moderate it a little bit and allow people to, come in their own time when they're ready for it.
I think something else I want to add to challenges is when you step into the path of the mystic, or you even step into the path where you're embodying some of your greatest gifts in life, some of your greatest talents, it's really easy to feel like that's all you're supposed to do. That is what your life is. This is a unique blueprint of who you are as a human being, and you're supposed to fulfill it and be it and bring that light into the world. And it's taken me a while to work with accepting the things that bring me alive, even if they aren't like super spiritual and really mystical and magical, but they're actually things that I just really love to do. So, and to give myself permission and to have conversations with my guides that I'm human and that I have desires to do real human things. And that sometimes I don't want to be traveling the ethers working in these ways. So for me, I love mentoring and supporting people and stepping into their practices and visibility and bringing their work out into the world. And oftentimes it's real tangible, kind of creating accountability and business planning and, supporting healers and change agents and kind of actualizing or manifesting what they're here to do. But it doesn't require a lot of mysticism or magic. Oftentimes it's just really honing in and supporting people and taking those steps and in a way releasing their binds or the fears that are holding them back. And it took me a few years to return to doing that work because I felt this kind of debt that I have this gift and I need to work with this gift in every session. And, working in kind of a coaching way doesn't do that. And so I think that's another challenge also is to kind of just be with your human self and access your gifts, harness those gifts, but do really what you want to do in constant conversation with your guides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really resonating with me, all of those struggles and this sort of feeling of debt and over eagerness, like really wanting for the world to see different tools or a different way of experiencing that they have access to. I've experienced that a lot this year where it brought me some suffering that I wanted that for the world, yet sometimes the world doesn't necessarily want that. And to accept that where it is. And as you were saying, Dan, to let people come at their own pace. And what I found for me was that connected right up with that younger self in me and other parts of me that wanted to save the world and needed to survive, that it was a terrifying world. And if I could save it, then it would just be better. So it's this sense of needing control. And to shift gears, to heal some of those wounds and shift gears into what actually makes me feel alive and live and feel joy and like I want to be alive. And a big part of that this year for me has been getting into ballet and horseback riding. And so I really resonate with what you're saying. Thank you for that.
But it's interesting, Candice, because I would really love for you to save the world.
Yeah, me too.
I probably should encourage you, but
I would love for all of us to save the world. Yes. No, I don't want to do it myself.
Right. I don't want to put too much air in that balloon. But when I think of the work you're doing, I've been listening to the other podcasts and just feeling how impactful there are, and there's just a real beauty and wisdom in your message and the way you're putting the shows together, the mixture of meditative and informational, and bringing speakers in. It's really inspiring for me, and I certainly can understand. I have the same motivation as a child of Jewish parents. I don't know anything about your family background except your last name and your appearance. So I infer that you're you have a Chinese background. You go back to generations in China, and it's a place of a tremendous amount of wounding and suffering over the centuries, and certainly also in in recent decades. And so I can appreciate how you would be inspired to want to make an impact in this kind of chaotic world of humans harming themselves. And there is some balance. Obviously, we can't do it as individuals. There are big systems in play that are beyond any of our control. And there's also a way for each one of us to fully play our part. I just reflect back that I can appreciate you need to, be with your own artistry. But you do inspire me in that way, that the people that you're reaching are being impacted in a really positive way.
Thank you, Dan. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
And to the listeners, I would just add that we are on the faculty of the North American Systemic Constellations Intensive, and Candice presented a workshop in one of the breakout sessions at that intensive. And it was one of the best, I think the best constellation workshop I've attended. So for any of you that are interested in working with Candice, she's a phenomenal constellator, offers profound retreats and healing intensives, relationship coaching, and all sorts of different things. So check out our website, because she is saving the world in her healings and offerings, and she can have a profound impact on your life.
Thank you. It just really touches me, and I so appreciate you tuning into my work as well and engaging with it. It means the world to me, and it's so amazing coming from the two of you and seeing what you're doing and experiencing this unbelievable work you're doing that just opens up my soul and spirit. And I can't wait to jump in on your consciousness call. Would you share with the audience about what you do is it Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month?
The first Tuesday every month, we have a free consciousness call. It's at 8:00 Eastern. You can get information about it from our website, seeingwithyourheart.com. And it's an opportunity for us to, kind of a free public space and be able to do our work. So we have a lot of people call in internationally. We record it so people can download it and listen to it on their own time as well. And it's a chance for us to, share something of what we're doing with everybody. We do a little bit of meditation, and we do some teaching, and then we do some process work. It's different every time.
And it's great to be a part of the global community that joins in for that call. You'll feel callers from all over the world in some of the portions that are live, and you can kind of sense that your heart is connected to a global pulse of consciousness. And we're doing individual and collective healing on those calls.
That sounds amazing. What can people expect? I know that there isn't a set thing that happens, of course, and it's all intuitive to what's happening, but how does the call go? What can people experience?
When you call in, we'll open with a meditation. We then invite people into whatever the teaching is of the month. We send out a monthly newsletter with some points around consciousness, healing, self-love, and any of the turbulence in the collective world at the time. We'll kind of reflect on that. So when people call in, they'll receive a meditation that's kind of geared towards that topic. We'll offer some teachings on the topic of the month. And then we create constellations that people can participate in from the comfort of their own home, their computer, their phone, where they call in from. And you step into the fields of consciousness and really open to whatever's moving for you in that time. Typically, people release something on the call and manifest an intention that they're seeking to manifest. They kind of open to the consciousness that can manifest that. We get a lot of positive feedback from many of the people that call in about the changes that occurred as a result of them participating in the global call.
Beautiful.
I think the core teachings that we work with every month is that ancestral consciousness that resides in us. It's part of our cellular memory. It's encoded in our DNA. And it's also the consciousness that moves the universe. It's this larger field of, you could call it quantum consciousness or Akashic records. There's many different names for it. But it is the theme that consciousness creates life, not the other way around. And so that we are swimming in an ocean of consciousness, and that when we are connected to it and interacting with it, when we are receiving and transmitting into the field and gaining the resources, and particularly with our biological lineage, mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, and generations behind them, aunts and uncles, that when we ignore it, they create a lot of symptoms for it. When we pretend that we are just solo entities, just a random collection of molecules that just appeared, and when we exist that way, this consciousness breaks down the door to get through, and it does So through symptoms and repetitive fractal patterns of suffering. And when we open ourselves to it and interact with it, allow it to be with us on an ongoing basis, it actually releases all of those suffering patterns and become a resource and a type of blessing for us to really be able to thrive and bloom in the life that we have for this, however long it is that we're here.
When I'm sitting in your presence, Dan and Emily, I feel that sense of holding everything that's there in relationship, being in relationship with all that is within our consciousness in all the layers and that we're aware of, and connecting with it in different ways rather than omitting or erasing or trying to leave behind or cut off from us and just be one part of us. It's such a full feeling. And I hear it in your words, but I also feel it in your presence. And I really appreciate that sense that you bring out in the world. And so if you're here listening, you can check out Dan and Emily's work together in a variety of methods. Their one-on-one work with you. You guys do a free 30-minute consultation. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And they do workshops.
We invite people to contact us for the free consultation as just an opportunity for you to just share what's alive in your life, what struggles you're facing, what challenges, whether individually or in relationship to another, you're experiencing. And we tune in, and rather than asking what's causing this, we tune into who's present with you, what's alive in your life that is the consciousness that's contributing to these patterns, and offer some recommendations and insights for steps forward. So we welcome any of you to go to our website and sign up for that consult.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that either of you want to share today with me, with our audience, with each other? Maybe we can tune in here and see if any messages come through.
Oh, that's a great idea. You want to take a few seconds? We'll tune in. Let's
do
that. That's a great idea. A
Okay.
little dead air time is always good in podcasts.
So we actually invite all of you listening in to tune in as well. And that means just kind of closing your eyes and breathing with the pulse of life that is you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I can share an image. Did you get an image, Candice, you want to share first?
I got a wave of sadness. And that wave of sadness had to do with pieces of me and perhaps others, I'm not sure, but a sadness about all the ways, times that I've held myself in unworthiness and feeling like there are parts of me that are less than, as you were saying, Emily, with comparing ourselves to other people, especially if you're a woman mystic or empath. And that's my experience too, is comparing myself to others and seeing their qualities as better when it's really about the different aspects that are a treasure in me that can be brought to the situation or the interaction. So some sadness leaving. Thank you, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have?
So
you had an image?
I had an image came to me. I didn't think it was you. I thought it was a listener, and maybe you're channeling someone in your audience that will hear this. But I felt a person, seemed like a woman, who was standing kind of at the edge of a destroyed urban landscape, something that you might see kind of current day Detroit, where there are, so many blocks of abandoned and crumbling buildings and kind of broken glass, and a place of a feeling of hopelessness and destruction and violence. And it was almost like being in a painting where they were right at the edge of that, and they were looking forward to these green flowing hills and flowers blooming and a mountain beyond with clouds, kind of looked like a Mount Fuji kind of scene. And the first part of the landscape felt like the ordinary here and now. That's kind of the life that they're living with the work that they have and getting up in the morning, going to work and not having enough money and blah, 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 their mother and the boyfriend or whatever it is going on. And then they felt this kind of spirit calling for them. They felt guides and angels and a magical world, and they felt themselves getting called to step out of that ordinary and into, this brighter, more colorful landscape. And then they were caught with tentacles that were kind of grabbing and wrapped around them and kept them trapped. And they were struggling against the tentacles. But of course, those kind of forces, when you struggle and pull against them, they just grip tighter. They can't really be broken. And I felt the sadness in that. Time was passing and life was happening. And this beauty and possibility was right there, but it wasn't being accessed. And I felt, Emily and I there with the message which I described is actually there's a tool to release the tentacles. It's an animal, and it can be whispered to the same way you'd whisper to a horse or a dog. You can whisper to that what seems like a monster, but it actually has a lot of love and emotion in it and desire, and it can be worked with, and it will actually release when it's really understood and accepted and brought in as a part of being. It releases, and when it's treated like just something that wants to be gotten away from, that wants to be destroyed and eliminated, it grips tighter. And I felt, people in your audience, listeners, kind of struggling with that, and wishing for the wisdom to be able to free themselves and to be able to step more into the possibility of their own life. Mm-hmm. That was my image.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dan.
For me, I had two images that came present. The first image was I was laying in the bathtub, and it was when I listened to your podcast the first time, Candice. And I had this shooting pain in my low spine at the time. And I thought, this is about self-love. I had a major back injury, and I was trying to heal it without surgery or, some of the Western treatments that were being recommended. And I thought, I'm gonna tune into Candice's self-love podcast and start to create some self-care practices in my life. So I was laying in the bathtub listening to one of your podcasts and trying to send self-love to my low spine. That was the first image. And the second image was you right now where you're sitting with your mouth to the microphone and just generations and generations and generations of women standing behind you. I felt their terror of your visibility, that you're so visible, and that I don't think there's anybody that stood behind you who's been more visible in the world than you. And your voice is being heard and your impact is being made. And there's a fear of your ancestors. There's kind of a fear of what will happen. Will you get married? I don't even know if you're married. Will you get married? Will you have children? Will you live the traditional life that supposedly brings happiness? And kind of a fear that you're going to lose something in this. And then also this like tremendous pride that you came from them and that you're defying all the codes and the rules and the ways of being that are kind of locked into your bones and your blood and your ancestry. And you're actually bringing the gift that all of them wish they had, particularly the women. You're bringing that gift to the world, kind of distilling it from the suffering of your lineage of women who didn't feel a sense of self-love or wholeness. And you're kind of wielding it into this beautiful, pictured you with a sword, kind of sending it out into the world as like a beam of light and love and power. And it's when it touches the hearts of anybody that listens, it actually instills love into them and sends light into the darkest corners of their bodies, their pain, or their kind of anguish. And then when I imagined that light touching each person that's listening, I imagined all the ancestors behind them who also struggle with self-love being touched by your heart and your ancestors. And that's where I came out. It brought up some emotion in my heart.
Oh, wow. Thank you. If you could see me, you probably do see me, but if you could literally see me, I'm just in tears. I'm completely in tears. Yeah, thank you. And
you're a real gift to the world. And, you're embodying and kind of mentoring. And we always have this tagline, imagine who you could be, what you could do, and how your life would change if your inner critic, unwanted patterns, and heavy emotions lifted off your shoulders and evaporated. And there's a way where you've worked those threads and are living your love, and inviting everybody that's listening to do the same. And it's a real privilege, Candice, to be with you on this call and to be with your tears.
Thank you. It's
for all those that came before you.
Yes. Thank you. It's a real honor to be in your presence, both of you, and to hear this now. I feel like I'm getting my free consultation right here and now, live on the podcast. And what just pushed me right to the tears was the generations and generations of women. And I felt that sense of pride and love come through. And when you spoke about the terror, I could feel that very viscerally. And there isn't one podcast that I've turned on the mic and started recording where I didn't feel some version of that fear, anxiety, or terror before speaking. And that helps me place it even more. I have my own inner critic I work with a lot. I give a lot of love to myself for that. And I keep going most days, even through that, and relating to that. It helps me put that even into more perspective of who's speaking behind me when I turn the mic on and when that show gets published. So thank you very much. Just completely touched by both of you and your work and our conversation today. And I appreciate you both.
Thanks, Candice.
Thanks, Candice. It's been wonderful to speak with you and to know you, and to that we're that we're colleagues together and walking these paths together is really heartening for me. And it's so wonderful to share this time with you and your listeners.
And thank you to the listeners as well. That when you press play and say yes to self-care or self-love, and listen to these messages, that you're also working through, threads of oppression that stop you from resting, from rejuvenating, from being there for yourself. And that actually just the act of listening is an act of healing and of saying yes to your own life and releasing some of those threads that hold you back. So it's a real privilege to be with you. And thank you again, Candice, for having us on your call.
Thank you so much. And I echo that. Thank you to all the listeners out here, and in choosing to take the time to engage with yourself in this way and consider the things that we're saying, or let them touch you where they do touch you. And Dan and Emily, it is to me that your presence to me is quite a beautiful model of masculine, feminine, not just between the two of you, but within, and how you do that dance together and within yourselves and share that with the world so vulnerably. And I invite all of the listeners to see what that image gives for them and what that engagement gives, and to try out the consciousness call. It sounds incredible. And I love that you're doing the Constellations work right there so people can engage with it from their home or with a friend if they want to, just to be in that space together and to listen and to allow what wants to be seen. Thank you so much. Are there any last words?
I think just, we look forward to meeting you again in the field. I can't wait to for the chance to be together and step into the fields of consciousness with you. Likewise.
Thank you.
If you're feeling the tug of your heart to do work with us, with Candice, with any healer that or practitioner that that wants to support you, and then you find yourself kind of making excuses or saying no or stepping back or not really creating the time for taking that step in, just ask who is the resistance, who doesn't doesn't want you to access that gift of your wholeness and your love? Who stops you? What patterns are alive in your lineage that are preventing you from stepping in and are actually repeating themselves in your life or your children's lives? And how can you, despite the resistance in your heart, how can you step in? Welcome that person on your journey, welcome that resistance to come with you, but say yes. So listen to another call, check out our websites, and step into your own life and your own love. I think that's my closing statements. Thanks so much, Candice.
Thank you so much, Emily and Dan. I look forward to seeing you again. And until then, take care and much love to you both.
Thanks. Much love to you as well.
Much love, Candice.
As we conclude the show today, I want to thank Dan and Emily for coming on the show. It's such a pleasure to be in their presence. I just love when I'm able to connect with someone in the moment and to feel into what's here for all of us, any messages that arise and what seems to be emerging. And it's so fun to do that. I encourage you, if you found anything inspiring or interesting, to reach out to them or connect up with their work at seeingwithyourheart.com and find their consciousness call and see if that's interesting for you. And I'd like to end today's show with a little quote from them that really seems to hold the essence of their work. And here it is. All of us, the inspired, bewildered, angry, hopeful, and unaware, hold the potential to free our hearts from the binds of ancestral entanglements. As these burdens are released, we increase our capacity to live our lives as vehicles for the manifestation of our dreams. Thank you so much, Dan and Emily, and thank you all out there for listening. I hope this has touched you in many ways and in ways that it has touched me. Before you go, if you'd like to stay in touch with me or receive my bi-monthly newsletter, feel free to check that out at CandiceWu.com/embody. And if you're interested in receiving more just-in-time kind of meditations, self-love tips, and self-care, you can go to the Embody Community Facebook group. I'm wishing you all a really loving relationship with yourself, and I'll see you next time on the Embody podcast.